planes.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, and I'd like to call to order the July 18th, 2022 Transportation and Land Use Committee meeting. This room has a hearing loop. If you need hearing assistance, switch your hearing aids to the telecoil mode. If you need a headset, we have those available as well. Please see the clerk to request one. Our first, if you will, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. I usually start the meeting with a piece of useless information. I raced out of the house without checking my useless information, so tonight I have no useless information for you. I'm sorry.
Yes, hands.
Our first item is an information item on the Unmet Housing Needs Strategic Plan Quarterly and Annual Report. If we could have the team come up, I'd appreciate it. Good evening.
Good evening. I do have a presentation if you would like that.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Good evening, committee members. My name is Brian Regan, Housing Programs Manager with the Department of Housing and Community Development, and I'm pleased to introduce Michelle Winters, who is the new Acting Director of the Department of Housing and Community Development. Also with us is Mr. Joe Krobeth, who you know, and also virtually with us is Ms. Rebecca King, Housing Finance and Development Administrator, should there be any questions. The informational item before you tonight provides a fiscal year 2022 annual report and update on the third and fourth quarters of fiscal year 2022 as they pertain to the Unmet Housing Needs Strategic Plan and its implementation activities and progress towards achieving annual housing targets. As a reminder, the board adopted the Unmet Housing Needs Strategic Plan on September 8th, 2021. The plan is designed to be implemented over 5 years and includes annual attainable housing goals over a 20-year horizon. Overall, the plan includes 133 key action items that focus on establishing new methods, programs, and policies, and enhancing existing programs to address the county's unmet housing needs. 76 of the 133 key actions are prioritized in the 1 to 2 year or short-term timeframe. During the plan's adoption, the board directed staff to provide quarterly updates to TLUC regarding the plan's progress. The first update was provided to you this past February by Sarah Coyle-Estro, who, as you know, is now retired. During that meeting, it was requested of staff to provide updates on a fiscal year basis as opposed to a calendar year basis. In addition to the numerical targets set forth in the item, an implementation matrix is attached with the item, which provides progress updates for the numerous short-term action items identified in the plan. Time frame, the department that is leading the effort, applicable progress reports, and links to websites and documents are all provided. This matrix documents all of the dedicated hard work going on behind the scenes, not only by the Department of Housing and Community Development staff, but by other departments in the county and its external partners to further the goals of the Unmet Housing Needs Strategic Plan. When looking at the plan, annual attainable goals are defined as any housing for sale or rent entering the marketplace each year, affordable to families with incomes at or below 100% of the area median income. The AMI for 2022 for a family of 4 currently stands at $142,300. Such housing can be directly provided through county programs, such as the Affordable Dwelling Unit Program, through partnerships with affordable housing developers who utilize county loans, or through proffered commitments, or indirectly provided through policy changes enabling more accessory dwelling units, commercial innovation leading to initiatives such as rental, down payment, and monthly payment assistance programs, with the goal that 20% of forecasted new homes, as projected based on the land use policies in the 2019 Comprehensive Plan, will be attainable housing. What you see on this slide and what has been provided in the item is the annual attainable goal for fiscal year 2022. In addition, fiscal year 2021 data was provided as a baseline and for comparison at the request of TLUC at its meeting in February. In fiscal year 2021, the county had a goal of 250 units, including 200 new units and 50 opportunities for households to access attainable housing. During that year, the county and its partners provided 154 new units and 138 opportunities to access units. 61% of these units were related to rental, and 39% of these units were related to purchase. This total of 292 exceeded the attainable housing goal of 250. In fiscal year 2022, the county had a goal of 500 units, including 350 new units and 150 opportunities for households to access attainable housing. During the year, the county and its partners provided 55 new units and 126 opportunities to access units. 56% of these units were related to rental, and 44% of these units were related to purchase. As was stated during the previous TLUC meeting, these goals are indeed aggressive, and this total of 181 units did not meet the goal of 500 units. In light of this, be reminded that the plan was adopted 3 months into the fiscal year. TLUC decided that staff would report goals on a fiscal year basis as opposed to a calendar year basis, and TLUC also decided to report goals based on when the units are built and provided as opposed to approved. Collectively, between the 2 years, 473 units were provided. On the right-hand side of the chart, the area median income level corresponds with the household that has been assisted. In fiscal year 21, a majority of households that were assisted earned between 50 and 70% of the area median income. In fiscal year 22, a majority of households that were assisted earned between 30 and 50% of the area median income. Within these numbers, units were provided in the following manners: the ADU purchase program, the ADU rental program, proffered rental unmet housing needs units, the housing choice voucher program, the state rental assistance program, which is housing for individuals with developmental disabilities that want to live independently, home ownership opportunities realized through the county's community development block grant program in partnership with Habitat for Humanity, the county's home ownership loan programs, including the down payment closing cost assistance program and the SPARK program, in which Virginia Housing provides an allocation to to reduce the interest rate on eligible loans by 1%, and the county's affordable multifamily housing loan program, which provides gap financing for affordable rental housing units. In the third and fourth quarters of fiscal year 2022, the county and its partners provided 33 new units and 58 opportunities for households to access attainable housing. The overall number was almost identical to the total number of units provided in the first and second quarters of fiscal year 2022. In the third and fourth quarters, a majority of households that were assisted earned between 50 and 70% of the area median income. It is important to notify the committee that there are several projects to note that should be included within the next quarter. Staff is hopeful to provide this information as part of the next report. The leasing of Loudon View Senior Living, located in Sterling, should begin, which will provide 98 new apartments. The acquisition of Somerset Senior Apartments, also in Sterling, should take place, which will provide 102 units. And it is anticipated that as a result of ARPA funding, 21 additional housing choice vouchers will become available to deserving families. These 3 projects combined will add 221 attainable housing options in the next quarter alone. Finally, I want to provide the committee with a brief summary of the plan's highlights since the last update was provided in February. On March 1st, the board approved the conveyance of up to 6 acres of the Arcola School site to a nonprofit entity for the renovation of the school. In total, this project will include 74 rental units and approximately 226 for-purchase units. On March 9th, the board adopted amendments to Chapter 1460 of the Codified Ordinances to support the creation of the Rental Housing Acquisition and Preservation, or RHAP, loan program, which assists multifamily affordable housing developers in acquiring existing affordable rental units in the county to preserve and extend rental affordability. On March 15th, the board approved a loan of up to $4.75 million to Wind Development, LLC, for the purchase and preservation of the Somerset Senior Apartments, an existing 102-unit apartment property, to preserve it as affordable housing with long-term affordability commitments. On March 31st, the county administrator established the Independent Department of Housing and Community Development. On April 5th, the board adopted the fiscal year 2023 budget, allocating the equivalent of a half penny of real property tax revenue for affordable housing needs starting in fiscal year 2023. On April 19th, the board approved the allocation of $12 million in ARPA funding to develop and preserve affordable housing through new construction and acquisition loans, to partner with property owners to reduce rents, for capital improvement funding for existing attainable rental housing and manufactured home communities, and to implement the provision of temporary financial counseling services to support households that are currently renting. On May 17th, the board approved refinements and technical revisions to the Affordable Multifamily Home Loan Program guidelines. This program assists affordable multifamily housing developers in producing affordable rental units and is funded from the County of Loudon Housing Trust. On June 7th, the board endorsed revisions to the design characteristics of the suburban compact neighborhood place type policies of the 2019 general plan to include housing units that address unmet housing needs that exceed the applicable ADU requirements of the zoning ordinance. And finally, on June 21st, the board approved the termination of the Belmont Ridge Trust. The funds from the termination of the trust will be used to establish a soft second home purchase program or shared equity home purchase program as approved by the board to assist qualifying households with incomes from 70% to 100% of the area median income. While it is accurate that the fiscal year 2022 goal was not met, the 9 activities that were just mentioned, along with the affordable units in the pipeline, demonstrate that these actions will ultimately lead to a more robust offering of affordable options. They may not result in units being delivered immediately, but they set the tone for further affordability in the near and distant future. Additionally, these items are proof that the board is viewing affordable housing seriously and is dedicated to achieving the goals set forth in the plan. And at this time, I'll take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. We'll do 3-minute rounds, and let's start with Supervisor Kirshner.
I don't have any immediate questions. Thank you for the item. Well put together. I did have kind of 2 follow-up questions after reading the item that weren't really addressed, but I didn't expect them to be kind of inquisitive questions. So do we have a written goal as to the number of purchase versus rental units when we bring these through this process? I think you mentioned in your presentation right now we have about, I think it was in the 50s and somewhere in the 40s of rental to purchase. Is there a specific goal as to that mixture?
No, the goal is just an aggregate number regardless of purchase or rental.
Okay, and because I know a lot of members on the board, and myself included, obviously would like to see more purchase just because we've seen a lot of rental, but the number was a lot closer than I anticipated. The second question I have is on the purchase units, obviously if you, and I don't know all the rules, but my understanding, you stay there so long, eventually the home ultimately becomes yours. What is the success of that, of the percentage of folks who are finding purchase units? How successful is that? Do we have any sort of statistics on that, or is that something you can get in my office?
Absolutely, and that's a great question. You're right that after 15 years, and this is applicable to the Affordable Dwelling Unit Purchase Program, once the unit has been in the program for 15 years, the owner has the option of selling the unit at market and splitting the proceeds. Of those units that have been in the program for 15 years, don't quote me on it, but it's about 20% have actually sold. So we're seeing a good majority are staying in the units themselves.
Okay, so 20%, but in the meantime, if they end up moving out, it goes back into the program and gets recycled. Is that generally how it works?
Within the first 15 years,
Yes.
if they decide to sell, it would have to be sold to another certificate holder, correct?
Understand. Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Glass.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you for this presentation. I believe you may have answered my question at the beginning, but I want a little clarification. So in your determination, trying to figure out why we overperformed in the fiscal year 2021 with new units and then underperformed in fiscal year 2022.
Sure. So in fiscal year 2021, I guess the easier answer is the threshold was much lower. Also in 2021, Ashburn Chase came to market, and those were about 100 units. So that lifted that number pretty significantly. In fiscal year 2022, there were none of those kind of large-scale developments that came to fruition. So that's probably why you see the gap there as opposed to in the first year.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have a lot of questions, so if you don't mind, I might need more than one round. To the staff, thank you so much, and I would associate myself with Mr. Kirshner's comments. I always want more purchase units, but we have more than I realized. And this percentage of purchase units was more than I realized, which is very, very good news, although I'd like to see that number flipped at one day to have more purchase than rental, but we're getting closer. Quite a few questions. First of all, and this may not be an answer you have right now, maybe that's something you bring back to me. We hear all the time different numbers on how much housing, how much a house costs. You know, what is the cost of a house in the county? And if you talk to one organization, the number is much higher than the other organization. The number we routinely use is a number that I think is fairly well outdated, and we really don't know the cost of a single-family house, a townhouse. Is it possible to get back with us? And so when we start talking about this in more detail, we're all working with one number and not kind of pulling the number that we may have heard 6 years ago or something, and or any one particular organization's number. If you can get back with us with that, that would be really important. My second question is this: in this discussion about housing, are we starting to discuss things like land in lieu of or cash in lieu versus the developer just saying, I'm going to proffer this many units, I'm going to proffer this many attainable homes, I'm going to proffer this many UNUs. I do believe that we have to start getting out of the mode of the only way we get attainable housing on the ground for purchase or for rent is to be creative and do cash in lieu, do land in lieu, and those types of things. And so that's a question. If you have that, great. If you're not, you can come back with that.
So it's being discussed as part of the rewrite, the zoning ordinance rewrite, that will be an option for the land. And at least within the Department of Housing and Community Development, we've been pushing that in our referrals to land use applications to be a little bit more creative.
That's wonderful.
Are there partnerships? So if a location is near a school,
That
there
is
a way to
wonderful.
partnership with
That is
LCPS, et
wonderful.
cetera?
Thank you for that, and let's keep doing that and keep us updated. Do we know? I know that when we did the survey of public lands, we don't have that many public lands. Do we know what that survey looks like right now? And it's an interesting question because when we did the public land survey and we looked at other places, we found that so many of the public lands, it was shared with the school or shared with another county building. I don't know what our current public land offering is versus what it was. What, Tony, when we first got that number, like 4 years ago, we first got that number. I don't know if that number has changed. So can we get that number? And I will stop, and I'll need another round or two, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We can do that. Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you go to slide 4 in your presentation? The definition of attainable housing goal,
Sure.
annual attaining housing goal. So that forecasted new homes number of 40,950, that's what we envision between now and 2040. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and so our goal is to have 20% of the increase 20% of those 40,950 within the next almost 20 years to be attainable housing, correct?
Correct.
So that's where you got the 8,190. You gave us the number of units that we've had in the last 2 fiscal years, but you gave it just as a number. So do we know what it is as a percentage of the new homes that have occurred during that same period?
Do
'Cause
not
I'm
know.
wondering, are we at 20% of what has come online or been approved, or where are we?
Yeah, that would be a number that I have to obtain from planning
Okay.
and zoning, looking
That's
at the
fine.
numbers, and I'll get back.
And that's it. Other than that, you guys have been doing a great job on this, and thank you for all that you're doing.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much. I might need another round as well. So when we came up with the glide path and the goals, I remember making a note. We should not in any way, I mean, we're in a society where we kind of measure against goals, and short of the goal is somehow considered deficient in some way that's undefinable. I don't interpret the fiscal 22 numbers in that way at all. We don't know how we're doing unless we have a metric, and we're going to fine-tune that metric. So regarding that, I understand we made the decision to only include those houses that are delivered during that fiscal year. and I'm afraid I'm going to add work here on the chart, and I apologize, but I would like to see a column of ongoing number of attainable units in any category that were approved in that fiscal year. And we can count that then, we can do the math in our head when we see these columns. One column will have how much did we actually deliver and how much did we approve, and that gives us an idea. And in the column next to approved, it would be nice if we can see a date of when those approved are supposed to come online. And you keep it simple, like if it's over a 2 or 3 or 4 year period, the last year that all of those will be delivered is just fine. But that gives us some sense of what the lag is, and because if we've approved it, it's going to get built. I mean, it's pretty unusual if it's approved for it not to get built. And I think that would make this chart look considerably better if we were able to see the approved picture as well. I agree with the chair's comments on cash in lieu. That's going to require, I think, a bit more analysis, but I think it's an important number. So we had a developer offer us $1 million cash in lieu, and that's going to generate X number of attainable units. But it's going to generate X number of attainable units if we use the following programs and assume the following amounts in each of those programs. You've got carte blanche to figure out which of those how best you would use that $1 million. But I think it would be good to see an estimate from staff. With this $1 million, using these following programs, we think we can make accessible the following additional number of units. That would also, I think, add to the picture considerably. And then if we could break out in those actually provided and those actually approved, the number of purchase units versus the number of rental units, that would also be a great snapshot to add. I've got 22 seconds, and I haven't given you enough work yet. The matrix is really good, but I can't glance at that and see how we're doing. As I remember, there were 61 items that were one-year items. Mm-hmm. I would like to be able to look at this and say, red light, yellow light, or green light on each of those items, so I have some idea whether, in your estimation, we're on track or not on track. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay, great. Second round, Supervisor Kirshner. Nothing? Supervisor Glass, you done? Chair Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For our senior homes that we're talking about, if they are the ones that are, well, I guess for rental or purchase, but probably more for purchase, are they age-in-place facilities? I ask that because if we do more age-in-place, we can actually have a need for less senior housing. So do we know, can we maybe get an idea of how many of those are age in place and get back to me on that question for senior housing? Also, you know, I do not believe that neither the county nor the developer community can do this by ourselves. I really believe that we just have to have an all-in effort for this discussion, and an all-in effort looks like the philanthropic community, it looks like the business community, it looks like the faith-based community. And so what is the reach out that we're doing to different communities to try to be part of this effort? If you don't know that answer yet, that's fine. But in this plan, I'd like to see just a little bit more detail of who we're reaching out to and how and what that looks like. I've said before that there was a development in Utah, Salt Lake City, Utah, called the Hub, that is probably a model of an all-in effort, and really, really interesting. And I have some context on that if you need it. But what is the effort that we're reaching out to other places? How much of what we're talking about is house building versus preserving or keeping in stock what we have? I know that there have been a couple of times in the Broadrun, Algonquin, and Sterling area where some of the apartments were being sold after that offered attainable homes. And it doesn't mean that those homes will stay in the stock. And so in addition to building more, what is our effort toward keeping what we have already and making sure that anything we put in the stock remains? So that's a question. In the staff presentation on page 7 at the very bottom, the half-cent changes all the time depending on what the tax rate is. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's probably around $6 million. Is that right?
That's
probably around $6 million. Okay. And then lastly, with 34 seconds, I will say that when I talk to people about housing, and they say, a lot of people are like, don't build homes, don't build homes, don't build homes. That's the first thing we hear. When we talk about it, and I always ask, what is your issue? What I hear is, the roads are overcrowded, or my kid's school is overcrowded. So really, they're not talking about don't build homes. They're saying build infrastructure to support the homes that we have, and build that infrastructure either before or in conjunction with new homes. So I said that to say it's really important, I believe, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, if I can take about 30 more seconds.
Sure.
It's really important, I believe, to have a conversation with the public about housing. So it's not enough to say we have to build housing for the people who work here, who want to live here. We have to build housing for college students, have to build senior housing. We have to tell people, when we are doing this, that your roads won't be crowded because we're building this road, or that your school won't be crowded because we're building the school, or that all the other infrastructure, fire station, police department, all the utilities, green space, that's all infrastructure when that is coming online with new housing, and if it's coming online in conjunction. And I believe as we go out and have this discussion with the public, that's what they're really asking. They're really asking, will the infrastructure support the housing? And I think we haven't done a great job yet on having that discussion with the public. So thank you for all the work. This is a great item, and thank you, Mr. Chair, I got through it.
Thank you. Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't remember the number, but I know there's a regional number in what the gap is. And I wonder if sometimes I feel like we're so focused on just what we're doing and not knowing what our colleagues in our surrounding counties in the region are also doing. So I wonder if we could start having that in our update. If there's a way to get those numbers, what are the other counties in the region providing, and where are we at based on the regional goal instead of just here in Loudoun County?
I
Thanks.
believe that's provided by COG. I'll have to
But if that could be included in this, I think that would be great, unless any of my colleagues would not like to see that. But I don't think that's the case. Thank you.
My only question is, in the matrix, is there emphasis or is there an item in here on accessory dwelling units?
They will be included once provided. So if they are provided, then that would become part of the tally.
Okay. I think the chart is understating our progress in fiscal 22, again, because we're not looking at approved. I think we made some real progress on approved. But I think I would be really interested to see any new idea, because I think, and I've cited it before, a real paradigm shift could occur in the accessory dwelling unit space in Loudoun County. I think there's a lot of potential for accessory dwelling unit expansion, clearly being the rental market, but still, it would really expand that market considerably, and that might involve streamlined and expedited permitting processes and just redoing how we do accessory dwelling units. But if we could take a look at that, that would be good to see what the impact is. And this is a very good report. And again, I was not surprised by the fiscal 22 numbers at all. I think there's a lot of success story in here that we're not quite capturing yet. And I think once we start capturing, that'll look a lot better. We can go around again. Any other comments? I don't see any lights on. Anything else from staff? Anything we can do to help you or provide you with additional information?
Not at this point, but we'll let you know.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Next item is item number 2, which is an update on the zoning ordinance rewrite, and particularly on Chapter 5. And if I could, before we dive into this, I think I might be able to shorten this discussion quite a bit. And I want to take some point of personal privilege here at this, to start off to kind of set the tone here. We're about to complete the zoning ordinance committee process, and I'm really speaking to the TLUC members at this point, and Supervisor Umstattd. We're about to complete the ZOC process, and I want to say there's like 600 comments from the public and from various entities that on the ZOC. There's a lot of comments and a lot of inputs on the draft that we have so far. The normal sequence would be it would go to the Planning Commission. They would have a series of work sessions on the zoning ordinance rewrite. The work sessions would then report back to the Planning Commission. They would have several meetings. Then it would come to us. Then it would come back to the Transportation and Land Use Committee, and we would have several meetings. Then it would go to the board. I think the general consensus, and I think everybody on the dais would agree, we must get the zoning ordinance rewritten in this term. We must get it done in this term. We absolutely have to do that. And so I have been kind of nut rolling in my brain ways that we can expedite this process. And the thought that I had was if we can somehow break out of the paradigm of a sequential approval process for this plan and sort of amalgamate the review process so that all the key stakeholders are sort of involved from this point forward simultaneously. And I threw around some ideas. I spoke with Mr. Hemstreet. He had a very good suggestion, which I really liked. And then I talked with my team today. And so let me propose the following and then open it up for any comments from the dais, because I think I have a way that we can move forward. And apologies to the Planning Commission Chair and Vice Chair and the members of the Planning Commission. I haven't talked with them yet about this. Obviously, this is all predicated on them approving the process. To expedite this, what I would like to do is I plan to watch all of the Planning Commission work sessions on television, and within 48 hours, provide questions and comments to county staff on what I saw took place in the Planning Commission work session. Rather than have TLUC have multiple meetings, what I would like to ask each of the members of the Transportation Land Use Committee to do is to do the same thing. I'd like to task each of the TLUC members to watch the Planning Commission work sessions and within 48 hours submit your questions and comments to me, and I will then forward those on to the county staff. Yes, Madam Chair. Sorry.
My light is not on.
The reason I'm asking that is that basically folds TLUC into the process right from the outset. And it gives you a chance to hear the framework of what the discussion is, what the key issues are. I'm assuming that the Planning Commission work sessions will involve all of the various stakeholders that have already made inputs and bring that into the discussion. So we can hear that evolve, and then I will have a discussion based on your comments and inputs with county staff after each work session to kind of bring it all together into some kind of a consensus. It'll go then to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission will do what it's going to do. We can all watch those meetings. Then when it comes to the board by that point can move it to TLUC, and TLUC will have been monitoring this process all along and be up to speed with what's going on. We can have one meeting with TLUC with a rewrite. We'll all know, we've looked at it, we've submitted our comments and our questions. We do a little bit of polishing, and in one meeting we can give it back to the board and have them discuss it. With that, I will take a breath and open it up to comments from TLUC members. Let's start with Supervisor Kirshner.
Where do I start? Well, and thank you, Chair, for thinking through this process, because I have had, and recently I had a meeting with, I guess, a developer, a land use attorney, engineer, a number of other folks who have been doing land use work in the county for some time. And they were expressing a tremendous amount of concern for the actual draft that's currently in front of us. And they were also expressing significant concern, which raises my concern, given their experience, as to the very aggressive timeline that we have. So I do agree that we should do everything we can to get it done in this term. And I assume when you say this term, it's before the elections in November of 2023. I think the current timeline that we have is even sooner than that. I'm hoping to get it done, but prior to, I think, before we get into budget, I think is what we talked about. I'm not sure if we can do that and still do it right. But if some of the and certainly, I think me and my staff would be willing to watch and I was planning to do this anyway. We were willing to watch the Planning Commission meetings and the work sessions and submit questions and comments as quickly as possible. I think that would actually be a very helpful process. Obviously, it burdens us a lot more, but this is a very, very, this is probably 50 to 75% of what we do here, and this zoning rewrite is going to go forward for the next how many years, and I think it's really important that we get it right. Whether we can get that done in one TLUC session or not and send it back, I think that might be wishful thinking, but I do think that at least we can, I'm certainly willing to participate where I can.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Glass, anything?
I would agree with Supervisor Kirschner on, I'm not sure if we would be able to do it in one TLUC meeting, but I will participate in watching the Planning Commission and try to get as many questions as I possibly can. I see you, Chair Randall, looking, but.
Thank you. Chair Randall.
Has not said a word. Chair Randall. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So first of all, I completely agree that we have got to get this done in this session. Just like we had to get the comp plan done last session, we got to get this zoning rewrite done in this session. It will not be done before budget. That's just impossible. If we get this around June, July, we would be doing great. I do want to thank the people in ZOC and everyone who worked on the zoning rewrite. When you wait this long in a county this large to address your zoning, it's not going to be an easy or quick process. And as I said, the comp plan and the zoning are out of alignment because we did the comp plan last term, and that took us just about all of last term. But it is just not possible to get this done probably before June or July. Mr. Chairman, with due respect, I don't have the capacity or the staff capacity to do what you are asking me and my staff to do. I understand the reasons you're asking. I appreciate that. I will, as I do, talk to my planning commissioner, but usually on the day that the TLUX the Planning Commission's meeting, I'm literally headed out of the door at the same time they're meeting to another regional body at that same time. And when I can go back, if somebody tells me go watch this part or this part, I certainly will. But I would be fooling myself if I could committed myself or my staff to be able to watch all the TLUC meetings. There are 430,000 people in Loudon County. And there are 3.25 people in my office, and there's just no way I can commit to this. I think that you are doing a great job in lifting very heavy and doing yeoman's work, and your staff is absolutely incredible, and I appreciate that. But I cannot commit to that unless I have to hire another person literally to do that. So, but I appreciate your ideal, and I trust that you'll be watching those planning commission meetings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chair Randall literally took most of the words right out of my mouth that I was thinking. I think I want to get this done during this term. That would be great, and we really need to do that as best we can. I feel like we're already on an aggressive timeline. I feel like we're already hearing from the chamber and the business community and the residential community that they want more time to review and slow down, and I'm not sure that we will be as successful as we envision if we really try and fast forward the current timeline. And I just don't think I have the manpower to really watch those meetings, to really provide meaningful input. My first thought was, okay, let's approve more funding for each office so we can hire someone to actually focus just on that. But even then, it's like you got to get the right person. It takes a while to spin somebody up, and I know some people that are probably spun up enough, but I'm not sure if those are the exact people I want for the job, and I don't even know. I mean, it needs to be somebody who really understands what's happening in the history and all of that, and each issue that is important to each of our individual offices. It would be hard to do that, and I'm not sure that it would be very popular of a decision either with the media and the residents and the business community. So I definitely share we want to get this done, and how can we get it done during this term, but I'm just not sure it's gonna work out that way. But I think we can finish during this term under the current timeline, I hope. So thank you.
Thank you all very much. That's good input. So let's view it simply as a helpful request that if you can review these work sessions as they go on. And Supervisor Amstad, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, but thank you. I will review as able.
Okay, and so I plan to review each of these, and what I can do is, as I review each of these, I can send out a synopsis to the TLEC members and say, this is what happened at the work session last night, here are the key issues, these are the major issues that you want to look at, and if we need to do more homework, I can kind of guide that discussion and then have a discussion with county staff after each session. I'm very cognizant of the fact that if the members of TLEC basically are disengaged until the next to the last step, we're going to really add a lot of heartache and a lot of tough time for all of us if we do that. And so what I'm trying to do is lead turn, as we used to say in fighters, where this is going, kind of anticipate where we're going to be, not where we are right now. So that's what I'm trying to do. So it's a soft request, and I will monitor these and then send out a synopsis after each one of these and solicit inputs from everybody. The other thing I would like to ask TLEC members to consider, and I'll ask the board members to consider at the next board meeting. I've asked Mr. Hemstreet to provide me with a list of all the BMIs that we have submitted in this term that are currently ongoing. And the staff, as they always do, has come up with a plan to handle all of these BMIs and the zoning ordinance rewrite. It occurred to me while we were having these discussions that the zoning ordinance rewrite is the absolute top priority of everything we're working on right now. It is the #1 priority. And I could not think of any BMIs that I had that were a higher priority. And no BMIs, I didn't have any BMIs that I couldn't say, put them on the back burner until the zoning ordinance rewrite is complete. So I would like to ask each of you, I'll ask the board members too, look at your BMIs. When Mr. Hemstreet sends out this list of BMIs, look at them, and I'm hoping they include a rough timeline of how much staff work would be involved in these BMIs. His discussion with me was some of these are easy. We can do these with no extra work, hardly at all. Others are going to be a pretty gargantuan effort for staff. If, to the extent that we can put these BMIs on the back burner that are not that urgent, let's do it so we can free up some more bandwidth for the county staff working on the zoning ordinance rewrite. So that's coming up too. So with all of that laid as the groundwork, staff, feel free to provide the zoning ordinance update as you would like to. As far as a discussion on Chapter 5, I'm perfectly okay. If anybody would like to hear specifics on Chapter 5, that's fine, but it's going to come back around at least one more and probably 2 more times, and I'm not sure it would be a whole lot of value added to get into details on Chapter 5 tonight. But if you would like to ask some questions, that's fine. And staff, with all of that said, feel free to present as much as or little as you'd like.
Okay, well, I would suggest.
Ryan, can I just get into the schedule issue? Thank you, Mr. Turner. I think for the most part, if there are questions on Chapter 5, we'll take them. But you also saw in the item a brief discussion on schedule. And so we appreciate your comments about trying to follow along with the Planning Commission process. We are going to the Planning Commission for their public hearing on August 30th, and there's a set of chapters that will be before them and ready for public input, and then there's additional work to follow after that and another public hearing with the Planning Commission to be scheduled. I just think it would be helpful for the staff to accept your discussion you had with your colleagues right then and there to help with the multiple TLUC discussions that may ensue moving forward into the fall, but in no way would that substitute for the statutory requirements that the Planning Commission has to undertake. So we just wanted to make that clear. There are a variety of inputs that are providing some pressure on the staff's ability to get all of the work completed and to have a successful process moving forward. So you see in our item we mentioned the continuing discussion that you're having as a group with the next subject and the influence of the data center changes that may affect the overall project. You probably noticed today that the discussion that we included in both items says to be included in ZOR as we move forward or a separate amendment. So we really need to weigh the direction that we get and your input to make the best determination on how to get that work done. The other concern, I'll be very frank with the group today, that we have is the comments that we're seeing as well from the various interest groups and participants. I will tell you that as far as running a process like this for the county for many years, I think we overall do a really good job of that work. But you can tell from the comments that there is a need or a concern for folks to weigh in and engage and give their input appropriately based on what is the existing regulation and what is the change. So that's on us now moving forward to make that really dead clear so that the input that is obtained can be answered. And we need to share all of that with the Planning Commission and with you. The other issue is that, as you noted, the ZOC process has ended, and we expect that the leadership of the ZOC will be presenting their findings and recommendations to the Planning Commission. That did take quite a bit of time and ate into the schedule, and we are where we are as a result of that length of time being used. And also, I will just add that in addition to those items, when it comes to the second part of the workload moving forward to the Planning Commission, that information has to be, in my words, advertisable and notifiable. So it has to be ready when the ad hits the paper, and that it has to track well with public notice letters that go out. That will have to be correct. And so I am trying to be as clear as I can be that will have to be correct. So those are inducements affecting the schedule, and we're certainly willing to work with you and the rest of the board leadership and board members to identify ways to move quickly through the task at hand. And I think that was important for us to relay to you today. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Questions? Any questions for county staff on the zoning ordinance rewrite or on Chapter 5? Supervisor Kirshner.
Yeah, I have a couple questions based upon the discussion that we've just had. I know Mr. Turner mentioned freeing up the BMIs in order to be helpful to staff, and I don't know if this is a discussion that maybe you've already had with Mr. Hemstreet or not. How helpful would that be? Because I know there's a limited group that's actually working on there is a group working on the zoning rewrite, but there are others. Would that be helpful if some of the BMIs that were coming through, or is that just is it not that helpful? I'd like to know what the staff's
the work that's being done on the zoning ordinance rewrite is primarily being staffed out of DPZ.
Okay.
You have had a DPZ work program presented to the board a number of times, and there's also a number of BMIs that affect DPZ. So to the extent that those could be looked at to be helpful to that staff, that'd be great. Other BMIs are not really directed to DPZ staff, and I'm not saying there's not a resource. There may not be a resource implication for that affected department. There very well could be. But if you want to tie it to ZOR, then you have to tie it to DPZ and the staff that would be involved in responding to the BMI.
I think it would be helpful for us as a committee or even as a board here to kind of know maybe which of those BMI projects might be helpful to be put on the back burner in order to help you better address the zoning ordinance. I mean, because I don't keep a list of all of those in my head. So, did you have something to say, Joe? Go ahead.
I just wanted to remind the committee that we will be coming back in September with an update to the DPZ work plan, and that would be a good opportunity to have that conversation.
Thank you. You mentioned the public comment. This is one of the things that I think is probably pretty important, and you've been overwhelmed, and you're probably going to get a lot more public comments. So how are you keeping up? What is your plan to keep up with that, to address those public comments, to review all those comments? Because I think I have a lot of folks that are like, well, if my comment's just going to get lost. And as supervisors, I think we'd like to make comments as we go through this as well. So can you kind of give us some sense of where we're going, how we may receive those in terms of the condensed, and then also what it perhaps an ideal way to provide those comments by section, et cetera?
Yeah, I thank you for the question. I'll start off with a part A, and then I think Ryan may chime in with a part B. Absolutely, it is imperative to be able to track the comments. And we also would like to make those widely available to you, the Planning Commission, and anybody who has an interest in the project. So a compilation of comments received to date is underway. It's also important for us to be able to show in a very transparent manner the comments that were received in reaction to a draft at what point in time that draft was available. So that is something that we are endeavoring to respond to. And to the extent that we could make changes to drafts based on the comments we received as they moved to Planning Commission public hearing, we're also undertaking that step as well. But I will just ask Ryan to see if there's anything more specific that he has in terms of that response.
Yes. So first of all, none of the comments that we have received are being lost. We've got one is the zoning ordinance rewrite mailbox that I think all of you have utilized quite a bit and forwarding information and comments you've gotten from other groups. But yeah, we have our staff, our internal staff, we name them the code drafters, and they're working hard at revising the code based on comments, going through these comments. And when we go to the Planning Commission, part of the intent of that staff report is to give you a full list or give the Planning Commission a full list of the comments and those that we were able to resolve by the time we get that second draft in shape for the Planning Commission public hearing. Those unresolved comments will also be highlighted, that either ones that we didn't feel that we could make, or we didn't get a complete deliberation and research to resolve that comment. So yeah, they'll all be included.
Supervisor Glass.
Thank you, Chair Turner. And thank you, staff, for answering our questions. I have a question on sidewalks and ADA ramps. So will TLOC have an early look at draft development standards for pedestrian facilities as well? So I want to make sure, in particular, ADA ramps at intersections are fully built out and have accessibility to all sides of the intersections.
So I would respond to that by most of that, and the actual design of the ADA ramps is in the facility standards manual. And so right now that staff from building and development are, they've reviewed the zoning ordinance rewrite, and they've identified areas within the facility standards manual that need to be updated to then align with the zoning ordinance rewrite. But yeah, the actual dimensional standards for things like ADA ramps at crossings are something that's dealt with specifically in the facility standards manual.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to go back to the discussion we were just having. I think it's important that we don't talk about this in extremes. So it's not whether we will be involved with in watching every Planning Commission meeting and doing all that, or whether we will have no involvement at all until it comes to us and we're starting from scratch. There's a a middle ground in that, and we did this when we were in the comp plan. At some point, especially when it got to the Planning Commission, our heads just kind of pop up more, and you're more aware. And each supervisor is probably talking to their planning commissioner and talking to staff and getting information. And so, I guess I'm saying, first of all, I trust our staff. I have immense trust in Mr. Yudd, and I'm thrilled that he has been put in charge of this project. I'm probably a lot more thrilled than he is. He's been put in charge of this project. But I am concerned, but I'm not worried or panicked or anything like that yet. And so for all the groups who are talking to us, keep talking to us. Let us know what your concerns are, what your feelings are, what you want to see. But also know, one, we're listening, and two, we have a professional staff that knows what they're doing, that's been doing this for a long time, that's very committed. We have a committed planning commission, and we have a committed board. We will get this done. It will come in on time, and it will be correct. I think everybody should maybe just take a little bit of a breath. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'll associate myself with Chair Randall's comments that you just made. I was going to say a lot of that. Before I forget, I want to congratulate Assistant County Administrator Croboth on his recent promotion. I don't think I've seen you in person since that happened, so congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
And I would like to congratulate Mr. Hemstreet for making such a good decision to appoint Mr. Yudd and to be in charge of ZOR, because we did the same thing during the general plan, and he did a great job. So I have no doubt, as Chair Randall said, we have a lot of confidence in our staff. So I know we'll get to where it is that we want to be. You mentioned that you'll be coming back in September with the work plan, Department of Planning and Zoning work plan. I'm assuming that there'll be a recommendation in there that accounts for what we've just talked about to make sure that your recommendation would, in your view, keep us on track with our stated goal.
Yes,
Completion
we'll add language in that item to spur a discussion with the committee.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thanks. And to echo Chair Randall's comments, I really do want to thank all the members of the Zoning Ordinance Committee that have really done yeoman's work. It's been a very, very difficult process. It's been going on for, I guess, 2 years now. And we got slapped with the pandemic right in the middle of that process. Staff, I know, has been a burden for you as well, and I really do appreciate that great work. The only additional comment that I had to make is that we get each one of the letters from the various stakeholder groups, so NVBIA and NAOP and the chambers. And I read these letters, they're very thoughtful, they're very comprehensive, and I read these, and candidly, a lot of the stuff that they're talking about, I'm like a pig looking at a wristwatch. I mean, I just don't have any basis to say, I agree, I don't agree. As we go forward, it's always helpful as a touchstone for me when I know how county staff feels about that comment. So to the extent that we can do that, if there is an issue or a comment that's made that is you think to be a considerable one, it would be helpful in bold or near that comment, your reaction to that comment. Yes, no, valid, not valid. And I don't mean to add work, it's just I always feel comfortable, you guys are the experts, so I feel comfortable and I know where you stand on those larger issues. The NAOP letter is one that sticks out in my mind because it had 4 or 5 fairly big strategic issues that they were talking about. So it doesn't have to be an immediate response to the letter, that's not what I'm talking about, but somewhere in the process as you absorb those comments, when I go through and try and assess how I feel about the comments, I'm going to want to know how staff feels about those comments as we go through the process. Other than that, I don't have anything else. I don't see any lights on. Supervisor Umstattd, anything as our guest? No? All right. I think we are good on that item. Thank you all very much, and we'll move on to item number 3. Thank you all very much for coming, and the floor is yours.
Good evening. My name is Kate McConnell. I'm a principal planner with the Department of Planning and Zoning, and I will be presenting the third part of the 3-meeting discussion series on the data centers this evening. And this evening, we have Joe Croboth, Buddy Reiser, and Dan Galindo at the table with us, as well as Charles Yudd. And online, we have Mark Stoltz, Alex Gonski, and Carlene Cadaz. So just to summarize, we're in the third part of this discussion series. Tonight, we're looking for TLUC to finalize the recommendations on potential revisions to data center policies and regulations. And as the next steps, staff will prepare an item for the board consideration that includes those recommendations for regulatory changes that could be applicable to data centers. That would be included as part of the established zoning ordinance rewrite process or a separate zoning ordinance amendment. And then we would also prepare an item for future board consideration of initiating any CPAMs related to the recommended regulatory changes based on those recommendations from TLUC. Now, just briefly review the direction from the previous two meetings from TLUC. At the initial meeting in April, TLUC indicated that data centers should not be allowed in the Route 7 corridor or instead be regulated to mitigate the impacts in that corridor. They should not be allowed in the suburban mixed-use place type, and they should be not allowed in areas adjacent to residential neighborhoods. But that data centers should be allowed where they're envisioned by the 2019 general plan and within the Route 28 tax district. TLUC directed and supported the protection of existing or approved data centers, and also to explore a reduced Dulles Cloud South area where the major power lines intersect. But then at the June TLUC discussion, some of those recommendations did evolve, and they were essentially clarified. So data centers, the TLUC directed that data centers should not be allowed in the urban transit center, urban mixed use, urban employment, suburban mixed use, and suburban neighborhood place types. That they should be allowed by special exception in the suburban employment place type, and that higher building design standards should apply to the planned development town center and planned development research and development park zoning districts, as well as certain place types where data centers cannot be precluded through a zoning district change, and that additional environmental use-specific standards should apply in the Route 28 tax district. These essentially are the recommendations that the presentation and report focus on. There were additional recommendations at the TLUC meeting, and those were that data centers should be allowed by right in the suburban industrial mineral extraction, transition light industrial, transition industrial mineral extraction, and Leesburg JLMA employment place types. We're not focusing on those this evening because the zoning in those districts is consistent with the plan and your recommendations, so we did not need to explore those areas further. TLUC considered to indicate that data centers should be allowed in the Route 28 tax district, but that the suburban mixed-use place type and Route 7 should take precedence over the tax district, where TLUC recommended that data centers not be allowed. Recommended no further discussion of the Dulles Cloud South, and supported that conceptual proposal for the zoning ordinance rewrite, that the ZRTD legislation process be transitioned to an administrative process. So first, I'm showing you an overall map to just sort of give you an idea of the amount of data center development in the county, where the zoning districts allow the data center by right. And you have these maps, I believe, a paper copy as well, if you would like to look at that map as well. So when you see the series of maps we're showing you, the areas that are orange, pink, green, blue, green, and yellow are the zoning districts that allow data centers by right. And then these parcels that have a horizontal stripe are the parcels that are under data center development. So they could have an existing data center, they could have an approved site plan for a data center, they could also be owned by a data center entity with the intention of developing that parcel. And that information with the horizontal stripes is information that the Department of Economic Development has provided to us. And this also helps you to understand that we're taking into consideration the recommendation that we take that data center land into consideration as TLUC directed. Also on this map, and you'll see on the other maps, there's a pink dot that shows vacant parcels that allow data centers by right, and that's vacant as of around this time last year. We update that data annually, so there may have been some site plans approved for those parcels. And the green dots are data center ownership, but there is no active site plan for that property.
Chairman, can she go back and say that again? Because I'm not sure what pink dot. Sure. Oh, I see the little pink. Okay, the little pink dots that are sometimes inside the pink. So
yeah,
okay.
So they're just indicating that that's a vacant parcel.
Okay.
Just so you kind of understand the universe of vacant parcels in the county, as well as what's kind of under the data center development. So the first recommendation that staff is proposing is in regard to the suburban mixed-use, suburban neighborhood, and suburban compact neighborhood place types. And we included suburban neighborhood because TLUC directed us to consider a little bit of suburban neighborhood along Route 7, but for consistency, we thought we should include the entire place type. And we also included suburban compact neighborhood in this evaluation because when we were looking at parcels that allow data centers by right, there are a few parcels with a zoning that allows data centers by right in suburban compact neighborhood. And all three of these place types, data centers is not a use as envisioned by the plan. So we thought it would be appropriate to kind of look at those three holistically with that recommendation to preclude data centers in these place types. And what we're proposing is a two-step process. And I'll quickly go over the process and then we can look at the maps that kind of show a conceptual version of what we're talking about. So the first step would be to initiate a comprehensive plan amendment, or CPAM, to evaluate the limits of these place types. And what this does is it looks at where there is already some existing data center development in these place types and whether it would be appropriate to shift those limits of those place type boundaries to exclude those data centers in consideration of the direction that we protect existing and developed data centers in the county. And once we finalize those limits of those place types, we would implement a zoning district that applies to, in those place types, to the PDOP, PDRP, and PDIP zoning districts, and says, in these districts that we're consolidating, no data centers would be permitted. This is something that would not apply to the PDGI or PDTC in these place types. It would be in both the Route 28 tax district and outside of it. But what would happen in the tax district is that the data center development would have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis based on the protections that are provided in the Route 28 tax district. So it may continue, data centers may continue to be allowed, but they may not. It kind of depends on where they are in terms of their zoning and which zoning ordinance they're subject to. And if we followed this process, we would need to evaluate the ability to complete this as part of the zoning ordinance rewrite. So just to show you conceptually what we're talking about, in the map on the left, the sort of yellowy orange line shows the limits of the suburban mixed-use place type. And the purple parcels or purple area are parcels that are under data center development. So they could have a data center, they could have a site plan approved, or they could be owned by a data center corporation that's planning to develop a data center. And then the map, you also see the tax district is the kind of fuchsia pink outline. And then the map on the right says if we just didn't do any additional analysis, but we just took out the parcels that have data center development in the suburban mixed-use place type, the area that's left in blue would be sort of the new boundaries of the suburban mixed-use place type. Now, few caveats, we would want to avoid any donut holes or cutouts, so we need to evaluate those places, for instance, up just south of, let's see, I'm going to try to make my pointer easier for you to see. I don't know if this is going to work. But for instance, yeah, right in here, does that, oh, that was somebody else using a laser pointer, or is it me? Okay, okay. So I can see it now on my screen. I'm trying to move I can't point to where I want to point because the little screen is showing up. Is there any way that I can move that? What? I can't. And I'm getting stuck. Now I'm getting stuck. Yeah.
First off, where is the pointer?
Yeah, I know. It's this one. So I tried to make it laser and that's not really working.
trying to figure that out. Let me see if I can provide an example of what we're talking about. This is, right here, this is the Hyde Park development, which is currently an application for townhouse units. You can see the underlying zoning of this piece of land, the purple part right here, is administered as PDOP and it allows data centers. So if you look at the thing, data centers existing or in the process of development, staff has looked at this and said, this is a data center, it's being administered as PDOP, it could be a data center. We have an active development right now, it's in suburban mixed use, the yellow line. We have an active development to build townhouses under the suburban mixed use place type. What they're proposing is a CPAM that would exclude this purple piece which allows data centers and creates this. You can see they carved out the purple piece. And so the new suburban mixed use after the CPAM would become this modified piece with the data center parcel taken out. That's a CPAM, a comprehensive plan amendment to redefine suburban mixed use by this line, excluding this piece that could be a data center under the zoning right now. I have a bunch of questions about that, but I think that's an illustrative example.
That's correct. And this is purely conceptual. This is only showing it from the data center, existing data center development perspective. So we would want to look at these parcels individually, make sure that it really makes sense to remove them. Another example I was going to use was this one up here, south of 7, just inside the tax district. It looks like it's creating a donut hole, but the parcels to the south are in the floodplain. So maybe there's a potential to cut the parcels in the south out as well, so it's not making a hole, because we don't necessarily need to have suburban mixed use in the floodplain, because it's never going to develop anyway. So we need to look at the edge and kind of where it would be appropriate to cut them out. Another place would be along Route 28 in this area here, where perhaps it would be appropriate to just shift the boundary so that it runs along Route 28 in that area. And we would remove that from the suburban mixed-use place type. So that's the concept of the CPAM. But this is, again, just a very high level, no analysis. We would do that if that's what TLUC and the board directed us to do. So that's the first proposal, and I can answer questions about that now, or I could continue and we can discuss each one as we go.
Let's do a round of questions. Anybody? I got Chair Randall's like to ask a question. Go ahead, Chair Randall.
Make sure I'm doing this correctly. Okay. Taking what Chair Turner just said, okay, so that right there, the reason you would make that not data centers is because this is residential, correct?
The blue area is suburban mixed use.
Yes.
And that parcel happens to be in the suburban mixed-use place type right now. It has a potential for data center development. We would evaluate, is that really a good place for data center development or not? Do we support it? And then
this is when the discussion for me comes with, for lack of a better word, and I know this is a word that is inappropriate and that you all don't, we're spot zoning. Because this parcel right here on the edge of the suburban mixed use, depending on the design standards, depending on the buffering, depending on a lot of things, I might not take that out. I might allow data centers there, just depending, because it's at the edge, versus this right here, which is smack in the middle, and I get that the floodplain, ignore that, which is smack in the middle of suburban mixed use, and so there would be suburban mixed use or homes all around it, and not on the edge. No matter what design standards you did right there or right there or right there, it still is in the middle of a neighborhood. So help me out, because it's one or the other, right? We have to either say that this is gone and all this is gone. Could we ever say this can stay because of, it's like I said, it's on the outskirts, and we can do design standards, we can do buffering. How does that work?
well, we would not be removing the ability for a parcel that is allowed to develop a data center and may have some approvals to develop that data center. If there's a data center existing, it would become a non-conforming use. But if it were,
okay.
and then if we changed the zoning and there had been no approvals, then we would have to determine if that property
that
is
makes sense.
vested in
Okay,
the
that's a
ability to
very good
develop a
answer.
data center.
And if I can just expand on that, because I was going to hold off, but I think this is a perfect time to illustrate the larger issue here. There's two ways to approach this. And staff, if I misstate this, correct me. There's two ways to approach this. The first way is to look where data centers currently are or are being developed and say that horse has left the barn. The data centers have been approved. They are going to be developed in this area. We will apply a list of use-specific standards for those data centers going forward. We will change the limits through a CPAM of suburban mixed use, for example, and shrink it to exclude those areas where data centers are currently under development. And we'd say, you cannot build data centers now in the new suburban mixed use from the CPAM. The alternative way is to leave the limits where they are right now and not do a CPAM.
Correct.
But as soon as you do that, everywhere data centers are underdeveloped, they become a non-conforming use. Right. What does non-conforming use mean? It means they can stay there, they're a non-conforming use. But if they want to expand, if they want to add to their pad or to their campus, if they want to get financing for a capital improvement project, all of that then requires a legislative approval, correct?
The expansion would require a special exception.
Legislative
We
approval.
do not have purview over the financing.
So there's really two ways, and I think staff's recommendation is let's change the limits. Let's exclude all of the data centers that are currently underdeveloped. Change the limits, shrink the limits of the remaining place types with a CPAM, and then apply use-specific standards to all the data centers in the county. Have I said that right?
Generally, yes. We do want to look at it closely. We may not exclude all the data centers. We want to make sure it's appropriate. For instance, we don't want to create any kind of donuts or areas where we think, well, really this should be suburban mixed use and not. So there may be some potential for some data centers to remain. But, you know, the ones on the edge are probably ones that are likely candidates that could be removed. And then, yes, once they're removed, they would be in a different place type. They would still have the zoning that allows them to develop a data center, and then the use-specific standards would apply to those. But in the district that's created in suburban mixed use, that's where data centers would not be allowed.
Okay. Supervisor Glass, you had your light on.
Thank you, Chairman. When you were talking about the section right here, Hyde Park, and you're saying that it's on the edge, it's not technically really on the edge.
It's in.
Yeah, because across the street you have homes. You have the Broadlands community. So right across the street you have single-family homes.
And so that's why we're saying we wouldn't want to look at each parcel individually, see what's around it. If it makes sense to shift something into suburban employment because suburban employment is right next door, that would make sense. But to your point, for this area, there's residential across the street. Maybe that would not be an appropriate one to shift out of the mixed-use place type, because mixed use, we would support mixed-use development over the data center.
Okay, so let me get this clear then. So then you're saying like that would be an example of determining with the CPAM, no, this would not be a good place for data centers, or just going to, an example of another place, yes, this would be a good place for a data center.
That's correct. We want to look at each parcel individually, what's going on around it, what would be the most appropriate place type for it to become. It may stay suburban mixed use. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And just an added point on that. So we know that there's an application to build townhouses on that parcel that's currently zoned to allow data centers. If we left it in the suburban mixed-use lines that we currently have right now, and we passed the CPAM precluding data centers, and we approved the residential community, if something changed and that application fell through and the CPAM was in place, you could not build a data center on that because we would have changed that place type so that a data center on a suburban mixed-use piece of land would be a non-conforming use, and we would not approve that application.
Well, actually, you would have changed the zoning to approve the townhouses to a zoning district that probably doesn't allow data centers.
Okay,
so then they'd have to come back in and ask for another rezoning to go back to a zoning district that would allow data centers.
Got it. Thank you. Supervisor Kirschen.
Thank you, Chair. And I may have to leave a little early. I had got an emergency call I'm going to have to respond to in here a bit. So I want to get a couple of questions in real quick, specifically to the suburban mixed use. The area in blue is suburban mixed use, and our venture to remove data center development from there as a general rule is consistent with the general plan. Is that fair to say in terms of having data centers within the suburban mixed use?
The suburban mixed-use place type does not anticipate data centers.
Correct.
So, I mean, there's room for, I think, reevaluating those place type limits to, that would be consistent, yes.
Okay. So I am in favor of, obviously, the CPAM to remove those that are currently under development, or I think the way you have the data centers existing or in process of development, that makes total sense. We don't want them to become non-conforming use. Obviously, that's a whole process we have to go through, but if we're going to go through this exercise, it makes total sense to remove those. And I'm assuming under the motion, section 1A, where it says revise the limits of suburban mixed use, suburban neighborhood, and compact, and then the latter part of it says to ensure existing data center development is not affected by the creation of a zoning district precluding data centers and their place types. Is that what you're referring to here?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I was clear on that specifically. Let's see, anything else on the suburban mixed use? I had a couple of questions on the other, on the design standards and whatnot. Do we want to wait on that, Chair?
Yeah, let's wait.
Okay.
I think we're going to hear that.
And the only thing I would say, since I have about a minute and a half left, is, you know, we've worked for 15 years to bring and this is just all my colleagues and my thoughts on this. We've worked 15 years to bring the data center community, a new burgeoning, developing here, and I think we want to be, obviously, I think this exercise is good, and I just want to ensure the data center industry, that my goal is to continue to see data centers develop and grow here in the county. I think that's very, very important for me personally, as a supervisor. Obviously, there's this ongoing tension between the housing and what they look like and the design standards, and I think that's why we're going through a lot of this exercise. And so, obviously, providing a certain amount of regulatory and legal certainty in this whole process, I think, is really important to them and to their business models, to their suppliers, et cetera, in terms of not completely disrupting the whole, I guess, chain and process. So I don't have a lot of time left, but I just wanted to make sure, if I have to leave here in a few minutes, that I got that out. Now, one other thing, and I'll jump into this question. Are any of the recommendations on the table tonight require a special exception or minor special exception? I didn't, from the briefing, I believe that was not true, but I wanted to.
No, we are not recommending that there be data center approval by special exception.
Okay.
Or minor.
So it's not changing any of that. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I would like to associate myself with much of what Supervisor Kirshner just said. And just generally speaking, my thought process is, I think right now, and I reserve the right to change my mind, but I think right now I agree with with this recommended staff motion that's in the packet and everything you're recommending to do. But again, I reserve the right to change my mind. And the reason I say that is that I'm hopeful that when we if we make any recommendations tonight to send it to the full board, that we just make a recommendation to send it without a recommendation of approval or denial. Obviously, we wouldn't send it if it was recommendation of denial, but maybe the motion just says we send it to the board for consideration. So that gives, because when something comes from Finance Committee, which I'm not on now anymore, to the full board, if they do not make a recommendation, then I pay it more attention, and I school myself up a little more on it beforehand. And I know that, maybe a controversial topic or something like that. And so obviously I think whatever we do send, we should send for consideration without any recommendation. And I hope that there'll be enough time between whenever we send it, whenever we say to send it, which I guess could be tonight, and whenever it actually comes before the board, that the data center industry will have time, and I hope we ask them for this as well, to look at all of the recommendations that we are sending to the full board and come back to us well before, the night of that meeting, whenever that future meeting is, with a prioritized list of whatever their concerns are about what we sent to the board for consideration. And then for each concern, they should tell us, this is our specific concern about this, recommendation number one. This is the one that would be the most negative to us, and this is our thoughts on it. And we don't think you should do it at all, or we think here's another suggestion for how you could do that differently that we wouldn't mind, or something like that. But just for us to have the ability to for them to have enough time to provide meaningful input that we would have enough time to really consider and talk about and work with staff on and see if there's some other way that we might want to do things. And so that's just generally speaking. I think I'm good with the motion. Reserve the right to change my mind. Hope we send it for consideration and have enough time before that, whenever that full board meeting is, to consider the input from the industry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Supervisor Umstattd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think some really good points have been made tonight. I really appreciate Chair Turner's statement, I think, in support of carving out areas that may be currently within a category that will prohibit data centers, but carving out the adjacent areas and protecting the ability of the property owners to develop data centers. I agree with, I think, both Supervisor Buffington and Supervisor Kirshner. I think there needs to be certainty for the industry, just as I think there needs to be certainty for any commercial component of our economy. And I seem to recall in the staff report, staff was debating at what point vesting should apply, at what point a data center should be able to go forward. Certainly when an application has already been filed that's in compliance with current zoning. But I think there was also staff discussion about any data center company that had bought a parcel on the assumption that the way the land was planned and zoned, they would be able to put a data center. I would tend to agree with how I interpreted staff's reaction to that is, yes, if you have bought a parcel that has been planned and zoned for data centers, even if you haven't started building and you haven't submitted site plans, you should be able to go forward and build that data center. I've said it before, I think data centers should be allowed where they are allowed right now by right. I do agree that higher aesthetic standards can apply, probably should apply in some sensitive areas, but in general, I would not take away whatever rights the industry now has, just as I wouldn't take away any other commercial sector's rights. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I appreciate that. A couple of points. First, at what point legally do vested rights attach to the property?
I think Courtney is coming to the podium to answer that question.
Yes, thank you, Chair Turner. And actually, glad you asked that question because I was stepping up just to clarify something based on what Supervisor Umstattd said. So the issue of protecting property that has already been purchased by a data center, that's not an issue of vesting, right? So the debate, as you phrased it in the staff report, was this issue of what does it mean to say that something is currently under development? Does that mean you have something approved, you have an application in process, or just something has been purchased with the intent to develop? Those things don't have equal legal rights, so it's a decision point for the board to make as to what you want to do with your zoning decision going forward, but it's not a matter of vesting, right? So to Mr. Turner's question about when do vested rights attach, you would need an approval of some sort, a land development approval, and then there are additional criteria beyond that. I mean, some detail there. If you have a site plan that showed for an approved project, certainly, and you are diligently pursuing that. If you have an approved rezoning, it gets a little more involved there. But in terms of vested rights, you actually need an approval. So that discussion in the item wasn't about vesting. It was about when the board is making its regulatory decision-making, where are you looking to protect or maybe not change what is already zoned to allow data centers by right, I guess is a better way to say it. And does that answer your question, Mr. Turner?
It does.
Okay.
But let's take the example of Hyde Park here, which is an underlying administer as PDOP, which allows data centers. We know that there's a development application that's up for approval that will not include data centers. So there is no application for data centers. There's been no approval for data centers. So if for some reason that was included in, that was precluded from building a data center, the land may have been purchased by somebody who could build a data center. It would have been purchased at data center market rates because it's zoned to allow a data center. But we can, they're not vested. We can say you can't build a data center on this property with the CPAM, and there's no vesting issue there because we have no approval or application for a data center on that piece of land.
So not quite. So I thought there might have been some confusion on this in the prior discussion. A CPAM doesn't change the zoning. So my understanding is that property currently has a zoning designation that would allow a data center by right. Even if you did a CPAM, I guess it's in the suburban mixed use place type now. If you did the CPAM, it would either come out of the suburban mixed use place type, which is the idea is then you would say, from a planning perspective, it's okay for data center. If it stays within the suburban mixed use place type, it's really no different than it is right now. So as long as the zoning doesn't change, they could develop a data center unless there was a change to the zoning before the board took some action to change the zoning on that property. Or I guess I should say, unless they do something to give themselves a vested right before the board were to make some zoning change. But then to the point before, the application for Hyde Park is sufficiently detailed that if that were approved, that becomes it. And so they wouldn't be able to do a data
Okay.
center under that approval.
Can I ask Mr. Reiser, on your map, you define the areas in here that with the horizontal lines in them as data centers existing or in development as of June 9, 2022. What does in development mean? Where are they in the, does that mean the parcel has been bought by a data center company, or does it mean there's actively an application pending?
We would consider it actively an application.
Okay,
We've
so-
tried to separate that has been bought as in kind of a separate category.
Okay,
in
that's
deference to
your
that.
interpretation. Kate, is that the definition for the map?
So not this map, but the other one that you're referencing, that is the one, let me try to go back. Yes, the horizontal lines, what we tried to do was take the information from DED and then determine whether there has been a site plan approved. So the parcels that have and I'm just going to go to the next, now I can't move the slides at all. There we go. Okay, this slide shows it a little bit. So the parcels that have a green dot, which are very few, for instance, up here around Route 7 and Goose Creek, those are parcels that DPZ did some additional analysis. They have been identified by DED as saying, yes, they are owned by a data center developer, but they don't have an approved site plan. As of June 9th. I mean, they are, I believe, working towards, they've had a pre-submission meeting and are working towards a site plan, at least the parcel to the north. But right now, as of June 9th, they did not have a site plan approved. So any of the parcels that have horizontal stripes and a green dot do not have a site plan approved.
But I think to your question, Chair Turner, we would consider that in the development process.
Yes.
If they're in for an application.
That means they have purchased the land, and DED is identifying that as in the development process.
Okay, so let's take this parcel right here. This is inside suburban employment. It doesn't have horizontal lines, which means there's no active application. It's not in development for data center, but it's inside suburban employment. So it allows data centers with the proposed, if we pass this motion, with the use-specific standards applied to it, correct?
Correct. So if a data center were to develop there in the future, and the zoning, we adopted zoning district that applied additional use-specific standards, they would apply to that parcel.
Okay, so then let me restate just really quickly, because I think this is where the motion goes. So, and I'll just say it straight up, because this is really where we're at. To Supervisor Umstadt's point, I think the point of, And to Ms. Sidner's point, you would define vested meaning the application's been approved. You are now vested with the rights of that approved application. Okay. So prior to that, you're not vested. What we're basically saying is we're gonna assume everything that is under development for a data center is sacrosanct. We're not going to touch that. We're going to excise that from existing suburban mixed-use lines. We're going to submit a CPAM to redefine suburban mixed use. And what we have taken out is something that we consider to be under development, meaning there is an application to build a data center. It's not just a data center company has bought an empty parcel of land, done nothing with it, and they own that land. There is actually an application to develop that piece of land as a data center. Correct?
So I might need to, I think when previously you said data center under development.
Right.
And we do need to clarify the difference between, do they have something that's approved, a
Right.
site plan or rezoning, some sort of application, and a parcel that is simply owned and has no approvals?
Right.
So a parcel that has no approvals is not could not be vested in an approval because it has no approval.
Correct. Correct.
So I guess from what staff's seeking from TLUC is, when we look at the CPAM and we do the analysis, would you want us to include the parcels that are owned by a data center entity or only the parcels that have approval for a data center?
My personal feeling, and I'd like everybody's comments on this, I would include data centers, parcels that are under development for data centers. That would exclude parcels that are owned by a data center company with no active application.
And that, this is going to evolve. I mean,
Correct.
So
Correct.
it will
But
be
I understand the data center industry's argument that we bought this land with inflated data center market value and paid extra money for this land. We don't have an application on it yet, but we did buy this land, we own this land, and it's empty land. My feeling is that is included in the new limited suburban mixed-use neighborhood if it's appropriate. I mean, in other words, that's not protected. What is protected are parcels that are under some form of development to build a data center. If you're in the pipeline, we're going to protect that. You can finish the pipeline. But if you own, and now my next question then would be, when does the clock start? Because now we're talking about a run on the bank.
Mm-hmm.
TLUC makes a recommendation tonight, it goes to the board approves the recommendation in September. We haven't written the CPAM yet. The CPAM hasn't been approved yet. I'm assuming the data center industry then has, from that moment until the CPAM is finalized, to get their application in on their empty parcels. Is that correct? And that's pretty frank language, but that's what we're talking about.
It wouldn't even be based on when the CPAM comes in if they have the underlying zoning rights right now. If they already have those, they can have that until those zoning rights change.
Okay. All right, so to that extent, they are protected.
On certain parcels, yes.
Okay, on certain parcels. And we'd have to look at each parcel, it's a case at a time. Okay, I'm going to go to a round of questions. Supervisor Glass.
Thank you, Chairman. So is there a way to include noise and sound standards for data centers as part of the recommendations for zoning ordinance amendment?
That is something that we would be looking at in terms of the use-specific standards for data centers, especially in that consideration of the proximity to residential uses and how they're affecting residential uses. So we can look at that as part of those use-specific standards that we would, if TLUC directs and the board directs us to develop those.
Okay. So as part of the administrative or legislative applications, do our energy partners make comments during the referral process?
Right now, they do not, but we can add them to the list of referral requests that we send out for both legislative as well as administrative applications.
Okay. What are the consequences of being a non-conforming use in a zoning district? And are there ways to offer options to property owners who are non-conforming and want to expand their business?
So when you're a non-conforming use, you're allowed to continue. It's a use that would be legally established at the time that zoning allowed that use. And so then if the district changed and that use was no longer allowed, because it was legally established, it could continue to operate in perpetuity unless it stopped operating for 2 years, in 2 consecutive years. If that use wanted to expand, it would be required to get a special exception. But that's the current requirement in the ordinance and also in the draft proposed ordinance. We could look at some additional options for certain uses if we wanted to create some sort of opportunity for those to expand. That is something we could evaluate further.
Okay. Well, I have another question. So we've been talking about CPAMs just in general. Can you describe the process and what goes into a CPAM?
I think I'm going to let Dan answer that.
So the board would need to initiate either bringing something for themselves or acting on something that staff brings to the board to tell us to go to work on this thing. And as you've seen recently, quite often we've ended up having a motion establishing that desire, and we might come back a few months later with a work plan that goes into detail about sort of the limits of what we expect the CPAM to actually do to the plan document, as well as the process that we would go through to actually make those changes, where it's looking at research, going out to the public, sending things out for referral, maybe going back out to the public again and a third time, just depending on the complexity. And every time we bring those work plans forward, they have time frames associated with them of what we expect that roughly to take. But every CPAM is and can be different. They can be very simple and short, and they can be extremely long. So it just depends on what we'd be including in any particular amendment.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I understand what the motion is, but I think that this conversation is, I think this conversation is not, I think we're at the end of the conversation when we should back up. The goal of what we're doing here is to try to put enough clarity in place so that people who might want to develop a data center are not buying land that we will later on say no to on the land. What the data center community is asking for is clarity. And I get a little concerned when we say things, you know, I'm sad Mr. Kirshner left about, you know, we've been doing this for 15 years, let's not ruin the industry. Obviously not. And I think when we start to overstate stuff like that and make those overstatements, that in and of itself puts a chill in the community, in the data center community. What we're trying to do here in this whole exercise is say simply, where do we want data centers? Where do we not want them? And, you know, depending on where they are, what do we want to see? Do we want higher design centers? Do we want more buffering? What do we want to see? And that discussion all by itself is meant to help data center companies understand where to or not to purchase the land to start with. The goal is never to have a land purchased and then, you know, even though it's not vested because all they've done is purchase it, we say no. We know they're purchasing the land for that purpose, and we hope to not do that. And if we give enough clarity in this process, then that won't happen. And so the discussion of if they purchased it, is that vested? If they've done this, if that vested, I think it's the wrong discussion, with all due respect to everyone speaking. I think the discussion is how do we give enough clarity so the data center community does not purchase something in an area that we're later on going to say no to. And I believe, and I've said this to a couple of people in the community, and I know data center community is a very loose word, you know, that we, because we're public officials, are having these discussions in public. And so it's kind of some sausage making in public. And that might sound like we're not supportive, but nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, I think it's the opposite. I think we're so supportive of this industry. We want to help them get it right, and we want to talk to them throughout the process. And so how we speak about this on one extreme or the other is really important, because confusion all by itself will chill the industry, and that is the one thing we do not want to happen. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess my question right now is, are you wanting us to provide input on what in development means? Or is staff planning on making a recommendation to us at some point on what that means?
I think that we would look to the boards for their input on where do you mean property that's owned by the data center entity, or do you mean and everything else, approved site plans,
Okay.
existing data center, or only properties with approvals, with those approvals that are vested?
I think for me
Could be
personally,
vested.
generally speaking, and I know there's probably some of this is case by case, will give us the answer, because you all would have to do research on individual parcels to see if they have some sort of vested right already. But generally speaking, for me, I think that if they have bought that land already, whether they submitted an application or not, and they're able to prove to us, to the county, when they bought it, and that should be easy, and the rate that they paid, and if that market rate was data center, driven, then I think I'm in agreement with what I believe Supervisor Umstead is saying, is that we shouldn't then change what's allowed on that and remove data center, because you pay that. It's up to $2 million an acre now, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, buddy, but I think it's up to $2 million an acre now in some parts of the county for land that a buyer at the time believes they could build a data center on. And whether they've currently submitted, whether they have a approved site plan or nothing active or haven't submitted anything or not, they made a considerable investment in Loudon County to do what they hope is data center. And all the information they had at the time that they bought would have been that they could do data center. So I hate for us to go back and after the fact then say, well, we're going to change that to only if you have an application submitted by a certain date. Because my concern is that all of a sudden we'll get a bunch of applications submitted and we'll have to start our process for review of all that, and it's just going to cause more work on staff we're trying to do the ZOR. It's planning and zoning who does most of that work. So my personal opinion is that if they own it now, then we consider that in development. Thank you.
Supervisor Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Buddy. In the discussion on the need for certainty, and I appreciate Chair Randall and Supervisor Buffington's emphasis on that and completely agree with it. In relation to certainty and the issue of being in a non-conforming use category, do you see a situation where a data center that went forward and then was declared a non-conforming use could face a problem, another kind of problem like financing? Do you foresee that as being a possibility?
Yeah, I think that there's some land value impact, and I actually spoke with a couple of bankers over the last week or so who say that when they look at an application for, say, a refinancing, a non-conforming use is something that a user would get dinged on when refinancing, because it impacts the value. So those are, at least from my research, my talking with bankers, that was what I was told.
All right. And would that impact potentially their ability to invest in new servers,
new technologies, energy-saving technologies, or whatever? I think that it's a layer of uncertainty in that process, I think. So.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
My question then is, the key part is in paragraph 1 of the draft motion, subparagraph A. So revise the limits of the suburban mixed-use, suburban neighborhood, and suburban compact neighborhood place types where data centers are not envisioned, to ensure existing data center development is not affected by creation of a zoning district precluding data centers in these place types. So the key phrase then is existing data center development. And staff is looking for a definition recommendation from TLUC as to what existing data center development comprises. Do I have that right? That's the key sticking point.
Yes, would it mean property owned by a data center entity
Okay.
or approved?
Okay, and Mr. Reiser, your map was data center development, not just ownership of a parcel by a data center company. It was active development for a data center on that parcel.
Well, it depends on the map. I mean, I think that the map above you right now,
Right.
the purple is both under the development process and owned by with the
And
intention of
owned.
developing. Yeah.
And we are showing them all too, but we're calling out which ones don't have the approvals, any approval. So they're still shown with a horizontal stripe. They're just also indicated with the dot that they are not, there's no site plan approved.
Okay. I would like to poll the TLUC members right now. And the question is, do you feel that we should protect all parcels owned by a data center entity, including those that have not been developed? Or should we only exclude parcels that are under development, meaning they have started the application process for a data center? Supervisor Glass, what do you think? It's a non-binding vote. I just want a straw poll here.
Yeah, pick me first, huh?
Chair Randall, go ahead.
That is a almost an impossible question to ask. For the most part, I think the word all is tripping me up. I think I would say probably the vast majority, but all is a tough word when I don't know what all looks like. But I would say, because all could mean fairly, we have data centers that are, could be smack in the middle of neighborhoods, and so that would maybe, that for me is always a no. So all is a tough word for me, but I would say the majority, and I would say that if they've already purchased the land, I would lean toward trying to make it work and trying to see it help them see it through, but I do not want to say all, if that helps.
It doesn't help at all. Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry, Supervisor Glass?
Yes. I would have to agree with Chair Randall. I think that the issue that I have is that for my district where some of them are being developed or possibly being developed near neighborhoods. And that's the reason why, I had spoken about noise and sound standards and, if the energy partners, if they are in part of that process. There are a lot of things going on, so I hate to say, a positively yes or positively no, because I think there are some gray areas to this to say definitely yes or no to either side. So that's the issue that I'm having.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is what I addressed earlier, but I think my answer would be yes, generally speaking, yes, with the caveat that staff has to do some research on individual parcels and come up with a legal determination. So unless they come up with some legal determination otherwise, then I think for me the answer is yes. If they own it, then it should be considered in development.
Thank you. So let me be really specific here. Which map do we have up? Can we put up what's attachment 2 in the package, I think? It is parcels with zoning districts allowing data centers by right in multiple pay steps.
And Supervisor Turner, we were just sitting here looking at this map, and we counted about 13 parcels that DED has identified as under data center development that DPZ did not identify a site plan approved for.
Okay.
So of all the parcels, only about 13 are the ones that have ownership but no site plan approved or active.
Except, yeah, but all of these data centers, these red dots right here, all
Those-
of those would then, if we include
Those-
parcels that have been bought by data centers but not developed,
Those are, we're only looking at the green dots. The pink dots are simply vacant parcels. The green dots are vacant parcels that are data center entity owned. I don't know how many parcels total there are. It's,
Mr. Chairman, if I may, so 13 of hundreds, really, is that correct? Okay.
all right, well, if that's the case, then I would.
171, I think, is
I think
the
that's
total.
relevant. Then
Yep.
I think we probably have consensus on TLUC to call the definition existing data center development any parcel owned by a data center
Okay.
entity.
Mr. Chairman, no, because 13 is 13, and so any parcel means all, and I'm not going to say that. 13 is still 13.
I don't know what you're saying. I don't understand.
So are you saying that there's 13 say 13 parcels that,
There are 13 parcels that DPZ staff identified as of June 9th that do not have any sort of active or approved site plan for a data center. Those are the parcels that our
Right.
DED has identified as data center under development.
right,
So that includes the ones that have the ownership. So they have ownership, but there's no active site
right,
plan.
okay, so Mr. Chairman, what I'm saying is, those 13, I have to look at them closer before I would just say yes. Now, it's 13 out of hundreds, and so I don't think I'm being.
We don't have the luxury of looking at each one of them with the motion.
Which is
The motion-
why-
We have to define ensure existing
Well-
data center development as part of the motion. If we don't define that, the motion doesn't have any meaning.
Which is why, I'm not completely opposed to what Mr. Buffington said about, sending something through without a recommendation one way or the other. But this is the hard part, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to vote no on this because, boy, what a message to the data center community that I don't want to give. But if I say yes to everything and I come back and say even that one is no, then I feel like I broke my word, and I don't want to do that. I think breaking my word is what confuses and puts a chilling effect on the industry. So that is my trepidation, that when I say yes to all or every, it's all. But if I say no just because it's 13, that's a tough vote for me to take also. Does that make sense?
Not
Mr. Chairman?
Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Right,
Yeah, Mr. Vice Chair.
I guess my question is part of this motion actually to make a decision on that? Or do you want, are you
Well-
wanting to add another
Let me
part to the motion?
specify a couple of things. First, let me ask staff.
Because I don't think they need
If-
a motion for
Go ahead.
Now, I was just going to clarify that the motion would be to evaluate the parcels for their appropriateness of whether they should be in the suburban mixed-use place type. We can evaluate a parcel that's under ownership but no approval and still say that parcel might not be an appropriate parcel to remove. So it's really where should we be drawing the line when we're evaluating the parcels? Then we will come back with a recommendation of what we find appropriate. But it's just whether we should include them in the evaluation and the analysis.
That helps a lot.
Yeah.
That helps a lot.
Chair Turner, can I clarify a little bit more to add on to what Kate is saying? So the first level of analysis that would be undertaken would be that appropriateness for suburban mixed use and in the context of allowing data centers by the zoning in suburban mixed use. But as she says, the subsequent decision is going to depend on an awful lot. And the fact that ownership is a bit of a moving target, every day there are transactions that occur. And for us to be able to track, well, for sure, that's a data center entity, which is an undefined term. Buddy, the success that we've realized over the years of Buddy staying so close to the market, he knows who's buying those properties. But for the finite to the decimal point determination, what is a data center entity and who may think they're a data center entity and when did the transaction occur, that's going to be a little bit fleeting and hard to put your finger on. So if we understand tonight that the committee's has a concern about the acquisition, which is tremendous sums of money that has occurred with the intention of developing a data center, we know that moving forward. But I don't think we're able to put a fine point on it because of those those concerns that I just mentioned. So knowing that you're concerned about it, we'll have that as a ongoing update. But there are some aspects to the conversation that make it very difficult to measure.
And if I can just say, the intent here is to protect existing data center development. I mean, in good faith, we asked the sector to come here. We asked them to build. We've been doing that for 2 decades right now. They've been great community partners. And the goal here is to protect people that have skin in the game right now. And going forward, and acknowledge the fact that we're having this conversation, and then going forward saying, but in the future, we do not want data centers in these areas, and we're giving you a predictable map of where we don't want data centers. That's our intent. I think you capture that intent in the motion. So I'm very comfortable with the motion the way it's been made, with the caveat that Mr. Yudd just pointed out that to ensure existing data center development is a moving target, and you now understand our concern. The big question is existing data center development they own the land, or is it they've got an application in process to be determined? We'll allow the staff to go ahead and analyze that going forward. I do want to address one quick, and Kate, did you have something else you wanted to add?
No. I mean, I will present the other recommendations after this discussion.
Okay, great.
But I just want to
And
make sure
then
we
the
know.
only other thing I want to address Supervisor Buffington's point, and Chair Randall alluded to it. The data center industry requested of me that we slip the vote on this motion till September. And I've asked staff, if we do that, we'll have a straw poll tonight to give you direction, and then slip it till September for the final vote so the data center community can have a chance to respond. To the data center community, I will say I've had lengthy conversations with county staff. We are really up against the stops on a very major project, the zoning ordinance rewrite. And this is a critical piece of that rewrite. So understanding the concern of the data centers and cognizant of the sensitivities involved, with the assurance that I'm going to recommend that we vote on this motion and make a formal motion to the board tonight so that the staff has clear direction where TLUC feels at the end of this series, with the caveat in the motion, and I may add a further move in here to drive it home, that the board understands that between now and when the Board of Supervisors takes it up, there will be a robust opportunity for the data center community to provide inputs as to how they feel about the motions that we're making tonight. So I want everybody to understand that. It's absolutely essential that they have a chance to weigh in. Then the point I made to Supervisor Buffington's recommendation that we pass it to the Board of Supervisors without a recommendation, my thought would be that's no better than a straw poll, that are we binding your hands if we do that? I really think it's important for staff to have a clear and definitive determination of how TLUC feels about this motion. The board can still disapprove it in their discussions, but I really think it's probably better for us to make a recommendation.
So straw poll or no straw poll or motion with no recommendation, it still goes forward to the full board. So we would only know if you had made a recommendation and that recommendation prevailed, that you members were strong on that was firm. We would be moving forward trying to figure out how to process the appropriate amendments, but with all of those variables, we're still awaiting board direction.
All right. I don't see any lights on. Kate, go ahead and continue if you will, and I'm going to make a motion at the end of this.
Okay. So the next recommendation addresses the suburban employment place type, and this place type, the TLUC had recommended that any new data centers in this place type be required to be approved by special exception. After we did some analysis.
Kate, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
I actually had a request from a member of the dais, can we take a break? And I apologize that you got started, but this is a perfect time and a natural time to take a break. So I think I'm going to honor that.
Sure.
Hold that thought. We'll come
Okay.
back. Let's take a 20-minute break and we'll be back. Thank you. second part of the presentation. Ms. McConnell.
Thank you. Okay, so we started talking about the suburban employment place type. And so the recommendation from TLUC for the suburban employment place type was to require a special exception for data centers in this place type. And after we started looking at the parcels that are already under data center development from DED and overlaying that with the zoning that is in the suburban employment place type, we realized that most of the parcels, a large majority of the parcels out there, are predominantly under data center development right now. So we felt that probably a more appropriate approach to this area would be to apply use-specific standards to address the concerns that TLUC identified in terms of building design, proximity to residential uses, and environmental sustainability. So what we're recommending for this place type then is to develop those use-specific standards and apply those to all of the zoning districts that are in this place type. And this really will get at two things. It will apply to all the zoning districts as opposed to just the PD, IP, RDP, and OP in this place type. And it will, well, that's really it. It'll just apply to all things. And it'll also treat the use as a conditional use, which is consistent with the plan. It wouldn't be the special exception conditions, but it's the conditions that apply to this use and allow it by right. So that's the proposal for suburban employment. For the urban policy area, there was a general recommendation that from TLUC that there be no data centers allowed in the urban policy area. And there's three place types in the urban policy area. There's urban transit center, urban mixed use, and urban employment. And we'll talk, first of all, there's no zoning in urban mixed use that allows a data center by right, so we didn't really need to take that into consideration, and we don't need to discuss that place type. For urban transit center, which is the area on this slide that's surrounded by the light brown line. So this is around Ashburn Station, and this area down here is around Innovation Station. So what we're proposing in these districts is that we have a current zoning district, PD, TRC, or Planned Development Transit Related Center, that through the rewrite, we're renaming Urban Transit Center Zoning District. That's going to implement the Urban Transit Center place type. It does not allow data centers. Data centers are not envisioned in this place type. But that's the appropriate district for any future rezonings. So what we're proposing here is that we have a district that we could apply in the place type if someone came in to apply for rezoning in the future. But in the areas where data centers exist, which is this area in the northeast quadrant of the Ashburn Station area, the existing zoning will continue as those renamed districts that were similar to suburban employment. They'll have the use-specific standards. That will apply for the interim, and then any time in the future, if there were any reason for any redevelopment, the PDTC or the Urban Transit Center District would be the appropriate district to apply at that time. So that's how we're proposing to address the Urban Transit Center. And then over here, actually, in around Innovation Station, you do have the PDTC District. That has some pretty strict development standards for how data centers are allowed in that district. And also, you're considering Rivanna right now. It's currently proffering, I believe it's currently proffering out data centers as a use in general, so they wouldn't be allowed. And then, we're still expecting those higher design standards for PDTC anywhere else if it were proposed to develop. And this is also in the tax district. So we're also looking at these zoning districts on a case-by-case basis, so we felt the use-specific standards would be more applicable in this area than saying that the data centers just wouldn't be allowed in any of those zoning districts. For urban employment, what we're proposing is also kind of a two-step process. So when urban employment is this area that's surrounded in yellow, and you can see here that almost all of it is under data center development with the horizontal lines. There's actually only 3 parcels in the tax district that are developed with something else, and they are not vacant parcels. There's actual data center development occurring on all the horizontally striped parcels, and the other ones are developed with something else. So the urban employment place type was created with the acknowledgement that there's data center development occurring there. If TLUC finds that we're kind of rethinking this, and it's near a metro station, and really it shouldn't be data center development. It should be this more urban, densely populated, pedestrian-oriented development. What we would propose to do is another comprehensive plan amendment where we would simply remove the urban and employment place type and consolidate the entire area into the urban transit center place type. So what would happen again is we'd have this interim stage where the zoning stays the same. It's that consolidated PD, IP, RP, and RDP and OP district. The use-specific standards apply to the zoning that stays in place there. And then if someone wanted to redevelop in the future, the place type would support that urban transit center related zoning district. It would be urban transit center, no data centers allowed, and the appropriate district would implement the plan where there would be no data centers envisioned there. In this case, because it would be this mixed use development, the airport impact overlay district would regulate where residential uses are allowed. There are a couple places where the runways sort of, the noise contour projects up into that space, but it's not entirely taken up by the AIOD. So there could be, that's how the residential would be controlled in that area. And then the last recommendation, or the kind of second to last recommendation, was to develop additional use specific standards for all zoning districts allowing data centers. So this is kind of expanding on TLUC's recommendation to apply specific use specific standards in certain scenarios, but we're saying actually we think that there should be some use specific standards, additional ones developed that apply to all data centers regardless of where they're located. These would address those higher building design standards, proximity to residential uses, and also environmental sustainability. This is, again, that alternative to the special exception approval for suburban employment place type. Again, effects of development standards are going to depend on the vested rights of the individual parcels. And in the PDTC standards, they do address building design. We can look at some improvements, but they're pretty strict right now, but we'll continue to look at those and recommend continued evaluation of those. So those are the recommendations that we're bringing forward to TLUC. I did set up some questions that kind of go by those recommendations, but if you would like to just have any additional discussion on those, that's fine, or I can answer questions.
Mr. Chairman, can I have a point of information? Your PDTC are you saying Planned Development Transit Center or Town Center?
Town Center.
Town Center, thank you.
Any questions, anyone? Chair Randall.
So let me say back to you what I think I heard you said, but I'm not. Okay. I think I heard you say we would have standards on all data centers, no matter where they might be or what they might be, so that we wouldn't have to do a special exception in the suburban employment areas? Is that what you said?
Well, it's a two-part concept. So on one hand, it is addressing the recommendation that TLUC made to have a special exception requirement for suburban employment, because we're just applying the conditional standards to the by right use. But in addition to that, we're recommending that these actually just apply to all those zoning districts that allow data centers, so that we're creating, there's an expectation across the board that data centers are addressing building design, proximity to residential use, and the environmental and sustainability standards throughout the county.
We'd have, I'm just being really dense right now, and I apologize.
Okay.
We would have additional standards for suburban employment?
No, they would be the same standards. That would just apply to any zoning district.
Okay, I think I'm going to say it back to you one more time, okay? Because I need to know that I know when I leave this dais. We would have standards for data centers, no matter where they might be, in lieu of having those standards or any additional standards for suburban employment?
It's not really in lieu of, it's sort of, they're just the additional standards. We're not recommending that there be additional standards above what we're recommending for any of the other zoning districts in suburban employment. So instead of a special exception.
So then everyone would just have standards?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
If you can go to the map on page 11 that you had, I think. Excuse me. So the yellow line is urban employment,
Yes.
and that's going to be subsumed by a new urban transit center.
Well, it would be the extension of the existing urban transit center, which is this brown line. So it would just kind of
Okay,
be expanded urban transit center.
I guess my question is, and it would preclude data centers.
In the place, so as a planned land use for planning purposes, data centers would not be a listed use, but
So
this
all-
zoning would stay the same where data centers are currently allowed.
But all of the land inside this proposed new district is already data centers. So would that make it those non-conforming?
No, because this is the planned land use, not the zoning. The zoning, you're only going to become non-conforming through changing the zoning district.
And we're not changing the
We
zone.
would not be changing the zoning district. The concept is that for the future, the long range, if we made it urban transit center place type, which is the general plan, the long range plan, land use plan, the zoning to implement that place type would be a zoning district that doesn't allow data centers. So if someone wanted to rezone, they wanted to redevelop, they thought, I don't need to have a data center here anymore. We think we should start developing this urban transit-oriented development. You would have to rezone to the district. The appropriate district would be the urban transit center district, where data centers are not allowed. So it's sort of the planned land use for the very far into the future. But for now, we would not be able to affect what's happening in this area because of the existing data centers that are already approved.
Okay. Any other questions on the second part here? Okay. We have a quandary, and let's just dive in here and see where we go. It was apparently communicated to the data center community that there would be a fourth TLUC meeting. My discussions were, I will see if we can have a fourth TLUC meeting, but it's going to be driven by the zoning ordinance rewrite and how critical that is. It turns out it's very critical. So the two options that I was going to propose would be if we could accept the fourth meeting, TLUC meeting, to discuss this, to give the data center community a chance to respond to TLUC before it left TLUC. Then we would do that. We would have a straw poll vote to express the opinion of TLUC tonight and then go to a fourth TLUC meeting. My understanding is a fourth TLUC meeting, Mr. Yudd, would be a big monkey wrench in the zoning ordinance rewrite timetable. Is that an accurate statement?
Monkey wrench is a technical term. But for all the reasons I stated earlier about us waiting for full board direction, we would then be pushed further out on the calendar awaiting full board direction while you had another meeting.
Okay. I spoke with Ms. McConnell at the break, and non-attribution, this was not her idea, this was my idea. So let me just ask one more clarifying question. Back to Supervisor Buffington's suggestion that we forward it to the board with no recommendation either way. Does that help you at all, or would you prefer a TLUC recommendation?
A TLUC recommendation would be more definitive than no recommendation, because we would start working and figuring out how to plug into ZOR appropriately. With no recommendation, we feel less firm about that, and it'd be less clear. Right now, we're trying our best to give direction to a limited amount of staff who's got a lot to do in the first place to now figure it out. And so by making it less concrete, you increase that challenge.
Okay. Would it be sufficient if I split the baby, so to speak, with a recommendation in the motion to move it to the second meeting in September rather than the first meeting in September? Is that a reasonable compromise? If we'd had a fourth meeting, we would have a September TLUC meeting. It would go to the first board meeting in October. What I'm suggesting is that we vote it out tonight, but vote it out with a specific recommendation to go to the second meeting in September.
Second meeting is fine, and we would probably end up there anyway.
Okay. Madam Chair.
So just for a point of clarification, so what you're trying to do is to make sure that the data center community has time to speak with really not just TLUC members, but supervisors in general, and that's the question they're asking. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Let me ask one more question.
Sure.
Mr. Yudd, is there any? I understand how important the data center discussion is to the entire ZOR process. I completely understand that. Is there no work that can be done in the ZOR process that does not include the data center discussion right now?
Yeah, we would continue forward with the work that has no bearing on this type of remapping and this type of amendment. We already are doing that for the Planning Commission's hearing in August 30th. But we need to make decisions quickly and move into production quickly for that next second phase. And this is dependent on that. We would
So by the time we get this, if we waited to a fourth meeting, and really the issue is we have an August break. And so if we didn't have an August break, we wouldn't, we would, unless people want to be here in their August break, I do not. If we didn't have August break, we'd be back faster, obviously. So there is no work that can continue that does not include the data center discussion in the time that we're on break. You need this discussion to start so we stay on some kind of schedule.
If I heard you right, to say that there's no work that could continue in the interim, that would not be correct. We have plenty of work to do related to ZOR while we await final direction on data center work.
Well, then why, understanding that, and thank you for that answer, then why wouldn't it be, although not optimal, reasonable for us to go to a fourth meeting, even if it's after our August break?
Because you're talking about October full board, and we're in September. So I see that.
I understand what you're saying. Okay.
The other thing, Chair Randall and Mr. Turner.
Okay, thank you. I understand what you're saying.
I need to just reemphasize that we did make clear or tried our best to make clear in this item and in the ZOR item that our position would be to continue to fold this into the zoning ordinance rewrite or do a separate amendment. So that weighing all of the attributes of the direction that we may get or may not get or may get a little bit of tonight has to form that decision, what's the best path forward? So please know that those thoughts are under evaluation at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'm ready to make a motion, and I will speak in the motion to what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. I move that Transportation and Land Use Committee recommend to the Board of Supervisors that the board direct staff to move forward with the following comprehensive plan amendments. A, revise the limits of the suburban mixed-use, suburban neighborhood, and suburban compact neighborhood place types where data centers are not envisioned to ensure existing data center development is not affected by creation of a zoning district precluding data centers in these place types. And B, remove the urban employment place type and expand the urban transit center place type where data centers are not envisioned to include the vacated urban employment center place type to address not allowing future data centers in the urban transit center place type. And I further move that the Transportation and Land Use Committee recommend to the Board of Supervisors that the board direct staff to move forward with a process to implement the following revisions to the zoning ordinance. A, upon adoption of a comprehensive plan amendment to revise the limits of the suburban mixed-use, suburban neighborhood, and suburban compact neighborhood place types, create a zoning district in the zoning ordinance rewrite or as part of a separate zoning ordinance amendment that precludes data centers in the suburban mixed-use, suburban neighborhood, and suburban compact neighborhood place types. B, include use-specific standards in the zoning ordinance rewrite or as part of a separate zoning ordinance amendment that address high-quality building design, proximity to existing or planned residential uses, and environmental sustainability that would apply to all zoning districts that allow data centers except the Planned Development Town Center PDTC zoning district. And C, include use-specific standards in the zoning ordinance rewrite that further address high-quality building design that would apply to data centers in the Planned Development Town Center zoning district. I further move that TLUC recommend this item for the second board meeting in September, and that in the interim, that staff seek out formal inputs and comments from the data center community and include it as part of the item at the second September board meeting. Do I have a second?
For purposes of discussion, I will second, Mr. Chairman.
Moved and seconded. Opening comments. With profound apologies to the data center community. I don't know where the miscommunication occurred. I really do apologize. My intent was to try and go to a fourth meeting and take a straw poll vote at this meeting from the TLUC to get the sense of where we are. And the zoning ordinance rewrite is just a monumental project that we really need to move forward on. This is not, I'm not trying to short sheet the data center community. We're not trying to suddenly rush it through, regardless of what the perception may seem to be. It truly was a miscommunication. Had we gone to a fourth meeting, the TLUC would have met in the first meeting or the TLUC meeting in September and recommended it to the early October board meeting. As it is, we're recommending it to the second board meeting in September. That's a 2-week differential, and I think that's a reasonable compromise. We absolutely need to get the data center input, and I would further recommend that we recommend approval of this motion to the board, notwithstanding the vice chair's comments, which I understand completely, that we forward it with no recommendation. I just think it's important for this body to provide direction, interim direction, if you will, pending the comments from the data center community, to county staff so that they can get a sense of where TLUC stands on this motion and move forward from there. Other thoughts? Supervisor Glass.
Thank you, Chair Turner. I will support this motion, but I am still concerned about removing areas from the suburban place types, especially when the areas were otherwise envisioned as that place type. I see a few areas in or near the Broadrun district that I would not support opening up for data center development. I understand these areas were chosen to move place types because they have existed or planned data centers, but I still have issue with them being moved because data centers were not envisioned or appropriate for those locations. That being said, I will support the motion because it's not a final decision. As part of a comprehensive plan amendment, I would look more closely at the areas and parcels that are recommended to be moved and make a decision on those areas during the CPAM process. I do fully support the zoning ordinance amendment changes to increase standards for building design and sustainability, especially around residential areas. I would also like to add for staff if there is any ability to include noise and sound standards as well. I also want to say to the data center industry that I do support you in Loudon, and especially in the Broadrun district. This discussion series was an exercise on trying to mitigate some of the problems that have arisen during the large boom of their construction in this county. I know that the data center industry will continue to be a partner in this county, as I know they will continue to expand and call Loudon home. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to support the motion tentatively, but that doesn't mean I know what I'm going to do when we get to the meeting. So a couple of things. One, I'm going to ask staff, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, to talk to the supervisors who were not part of this committee. These 3 meetings were very, very involved. And with the exception of Supervisor Umstattd, I'm not sure people who are not part of this committee or have been following this. And so if we're going to get any place and they're going to vote on this, I think they need to be offered a fairly detailed briefing. That's the first thing. Second thing is I really appreciate the fact that I have been increasing my conversations and will continue to increase my conversations with the data center industry overall, because I think that the conversations are so important. I just believe clarity is the goal. I mean, it's not even where you fall sometimes, it's just clarity. So I have had those conversations. I'm going to have a lot more of them. I will be, just to let people know, I will be gone most of August, but my last week in August, I will be back, and I'm going to try to kind of fill my schedule with a lot of these meetings so people can have them. So I will also probably reach out to staff to make sure that I know what we've talked about here today, because it's been a lot, and I don't want to vote on things I'm not absolutely positively sure I know that I'm voting on. So consider this vote to forward this, because I think we do got to get this moving and going. But depending on what happens between now and when it comes to second meeting in September, I may be putting other motions or other motions forward or not. I don't know yet. So, but I'll support this today. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, staff, for incredible amounts of work over the past many months. And thank you to Mr. Chairman. You have done very, very heavy lifting. You literally read Data Center Weekly.
Mm-hmm.
What? Right? And then you call me to tell me about it. Please stop doing that. No one needs that in your life. But no kidding, everyone has done such a good job, and we're all just trying to get this right. So thank you to staff, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the data center community as well.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can we split this motion and vote separately on whether or not to have a recommendation when we send it? Because I'd like to send it, I just don't want to have a recommendation. Is there any legal issue with that?
Are we okay with the split?
Well, there's nothing on the motion that says make a recommendation, so you can. I'm not sure which you would
Well,
split.
I think the chairman added it at the end.
I'm trying to remember my last further move. I was doing it on the fly. Did anybody capture my last further move?
The reference to recommendation is in the first sentence of
Right.
the
It's
motion.
in,
Oh, it is?
It's in
It's a
the.
recommendation.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I think you repeated it again at
Yep.
the end.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. So if I guess if we cannot do that, then unfortunately I won't be supporting the motion tonight for the reasons I stated earlier.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I want to compliment staff. I knew this was a tough job, but I had no idea it was going to be as complex as it ended up being, and it ended up being every bit as complex as it's the worst nightmare anybody could have imagined. But I also think it's an absolutely essential conversation to have, and this was the right time to have it. I think the goal of everybody on the Transportation Land Use Committee, and I suspect the board will be as well, we want to protect existing data center development. There was some question at the first TLUC meeting whether or not we could affect data centers already underdeveloped. And it became clear to me fairly early on, and I think the rest of us, that not only could you not do that without ending up with a whole bunch of unintended, not very desirable consequences, but it wasn't fair. It just was not fair to an industry that has been very good to the county and also are making business decisions every day to move forward with development that we've encouraged in this county. So I think when we finally got to this last meeting here, the task before county staff was protect the existing data center community, state clearly where we do not want data centers in the future going forward, and then establish some use-specific standards to further refine what we would like data centers to look like and create some additional specific use standards around existing data centers. And I think that's exactly what staff has accomplished. I was very pleased when I read this item, as complex as it was. And I really do commend staff on this really good work. I commend the data center community. There is always the possibility when you have these kinds of discussions to allow motions to overcome the discussion and for the discussion to get hyperbolic very easily. This was a very sensitive discussion. And I think every stakeholder, and particularly the data center community, kept their powder dry and took the high ground and let the conversation develop and move along. I'm sorry for the stumble here at the end, the miscommunication about the fourth meeting. I think this is a reasonable compromise. We do have the August break, and it really is a differential of only about 2 weeks. And it's not just lip service that we're asking for data center input. cannot make an informed decision at the Board of Supervisors without robust data center input on these motions as we've made them. But now we've made them, and now staff has direction. We have something concrete to react to, and as the Chair, Randall, said, there's a lot of questions that still need to be addressed in the board meeting as we go forward. So with that, I really do appreciate everyone's very, very hard work, and I will ask for the vote. The motion is on the table and has been seconded by Chair Randall. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Supervisor Glass, you're an aye. All opposed, say nay. And we have one absent, so that motion will pass 3-1-1. Any other discussion? Supervisor Glass, do you want to make your motion for the? We have an additional motion Supervisor Glass would like to make. Microphone.
I move that the Transportation and Land Use Committee recommend to the Board of Supervisors that the board direct staff to include Dominion Energy and Novec Energy in the request for referrals for administrative applications for data centers and all legislative applications.
I'll second that. Discussion.
Yes. I've made this motion to include Dominion and Novec as referral partners during our land use review process because basically they should be there. And I recently found out that they weren't. During many data center applications, we ask the applicant whether a substation is needed and if there is sufficient capacity around the site. Having Dominion and Novec be a referral partner would provide both groups to have a formal statement made with regard to needs and capacity around site plans of both administrative and legislative natures. I did include the motion for the referral request to be sent during all legislative applications, not just ones with data centers. Although most non-data center legislative applications do not require large amounts of power, I want to provide Novec and Dominion the opportunity to comment should they feel substation or power line projects nearby to a rezoning might be necessary to comment in on a referral. And I hope this change will help us better understand what we need to plan with for regard to expansion of the data center industry and general development in Loudon moving forward.
Thank you. Other comments, Vice Chair?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does staff have any input on this? Are there any negative impacts that you can think of? Does it need to be done for all legislative applications, which I'm assuming are everything that we vote on from a developer that puts forward an application, even for residential?
I would just offer to remind the board that there are times when Novec or Dominion are applicants to the county. And so we would want to temper that type of a referral under that concept, with the understanding that they may be also the applicant. But aside from that, I don't see any negative issues.
And no concerns with delay?
We're always concerned about delay.
Yeah.
But I can think of times in the past where, as needed or specific to the application, we did reach out to the electric entity, the power provider, but not on a regular basis. So I think this would fold that into our process. And just to be clear, we do get referrals on administrative applications as well. So we could include both Novec and Dominion in that process.
Doesn't seem like you have any major heartburn about this.
No.
Is that right? No? Okay. Yeah, I'll be supportive. Thank you.
Is
No
anybody
heartburn.
else? Ms.
No
McConnell?
shaking no heartburn. Not there's an issue, just that there's not an issue. No, there's no.
And
we do not have an issue.
Can I ask, I guess a further clarifying question, Mr. Chairman. Would this go as a recommendation from TLUC to the board, just like the rest of the motion? So is that your intent? Okay. I'm okay with it. I'll support this part.
Right.
And I apologize I didn't support the other part. I support it. I just don't want to be making a recommendation. That's why I voted no. Thank you.
And just my comments as a second. I've been to several Dominion meetings over the last couple of months and looked at the plans that they have for Loudon County. I believe it's, I want to say 2 more 500 kilovolt transmission lines and a number of other issues. And until I saw the motion, I didn't realize how good it is, but we really should have power considerations in every application from this point going forward as part of the referral process. So at least they get a bite at the apple and get to look at it. So I'm very happy to support this. Closing comments.
Yes, and I just wanted to say that we have Loudon Water, LCPS, VDOT are already external referral partners that we have. So that's basically what I'm looking for.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask Ms. Glass a question, if that's okay?
Absolutely.
Apologize for any protocol breach, but when you raise Loudon Water as a referral, that is correct. But I will also tell you that they do quite a bit of capacity planning and service area planning based on our comp plan, based on our adopted comp plan. So I think if you took that experience and compared it to what you're looking for electric utilities, we have the very exercise that we've been through with the committee right now, where the comp plan has place types that call for certain types of non-residential commercial development. Our zoning districts, as they exist right now, have that same structure. So if it's okay for one utility, then it should be okay for other utilities as well. That based on our long-range plans that have been adopted, comp plans since June of 19, and zoning districts that have been long-standing. The 2014 amendment that allowed data centers is 8 years old. So that type of planning to be able to serve potential uses should be occurring. With this motion, you're getting really specific with referrals that are development decisions that folks have decided to prepare plans for and make great investment for. So it's going to bring it to now pretty quickly. But I would just say the long-range utility planning is done by other entities. I think we would expect that the same type of long-range planning to be done by electric utilities as well.
Thank you.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion will pass. I have an abstention, so that motion will pass 3-0-1-1, I believe is correct. Yes. 3. There's no no's. One's absent and one abstained. 3-0-1-1. Yeah. Any other comments for the Transportation and Land Use Committee? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much.